Hello, welcome to SquishiVision. We're back. Doctor Who's back. We watched Doctor Who. First time in 13 months. We can talk about Doctor Who. The one thing on the channel I'm actually pretty decent at talking about. I guess. But also, what's the controversy? I've not read any of the posts. And I haven't yet. Because obviously I didn't want the episode spoiled for me. And I didn't have a chance to watch it on Friday. Because I was playing D&D. Yesterday, sorry, for Saturday I was at a pro-Palestine protest, Free Palestine. And then in the evening I don't know what happened. I think I was watching Buffy and then I fell asleep. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yesterday I was LARPing. I was a LARP. And then I ran straight into a tree. And you can see it. There's no restriction, he's looking. This way, right? I ran into a tree branch. Is this the right way? Yeah. I ran into a tree branch and punctured my eyeball. So that doesn't happen. But we're watching it now. And people like I vaguely saw something about retconning Davros. Something to do with him not being in his chair. Admittedly, it's been a while since I watched Genesis of the Daleks, but I did just quickly scroll the transcript. Was someone correct me if I'm wrong? Because like I said, it's been a while. And my Doctor Who knowledge is really good, but it's not perfect. And I haven't, like I said, watched episodes, and I didn't know really what I was looking out for to double check my knowledge. My Doctor Who knowledge used to be much better when I was less ill. But what's changed that he wasn't in a, well, presumably this is pre-wheelchair. I mean, this is chronologically the second time we see Davros. We know he wasn't born needing mobility assistance because he was we saw him as a child. So presumably something had happened. This is still before we see him canonically in the chair. So what's the controversy? I know there's been something about like disability representation and how disabled people are portrayed in media quite villainously, which I know a lot about because that was what I wrote my dissertation on, amongst other things. I never felt Davros was particularly, I mean, well, no, okay. He is a example of that. He's not particularly grotesque one of that. I mean, as far as it goes, it's not, it's not a clear area. Because there's a lot of there's not a vacuum here. And maybe I'm going to go back into a bit further on. This is actually a really interesting thing to discuss. And I don't know if we necessarily have the scope here to do it. Nor do I think this is necessarily a controversy that this episode brings along. This has always been a thing with the Daleks. But, they are Nazi analogies, like perhaps they could not be any more blatantly, representative of Nazi Germany. Especially the more they go along, the more you get kind of that symbology put into it. But from the get-go, they were Nazis through and through. They're fascists. They're racial purists. And obviously part of that racial purity and that purity ideology was they believed in eugenics. They killed disabled people. Someone like myself would have been killed in Nazi Germany for my disabilities, probably. certainly anyone who was physically disabled to the point where they couldn't work in a capitalist society would have been killed. That's part of Nazi Germany. It wasn't all just the other kind of racial stuff, it was the ability stuff. So they, the Nazi Germanists were ableist fascists. So it's an interesting kind of idea to bring in kind of disability into that. But their whole thing was, we're mutating, which again is a disability concept, mutations. We're moving away from this kind of ideal symbology, but rather than kind of trying to correct them back towards it, they move them into this kind of, technology thing. And I never really saw that as necessarily a commentary on disability. It was more just an incidental, interesting fact of their depiction. The fact that they used, I think the design of the Daleks was never meant to be evocative of a wheelchair so much as it was this inhuman, silhouette to kind of strengthen the inhumanity that they had. And then because we brought Davros in, and it's kind of, to be fair, it is actually kind of a nice symbology to have Davros half be that. I think that's all incidental. And I say this as someone not obviously a wheelchair user, but a disabled with some degree of mobility disability, and as someone who has a master's degree in this. But there's a spectrum of interpretations you can have here. But that's always been like the thing about horror, really, and so much of our horror genre is embedded in the idea of monstrosity, and so much of the idea of a monstrosity is built in abnormal, inhuman, and anormal, atypical, body difference stuff. It's a facet of the genre. It's an unfortunate one, and it's one we need to get rid of, but it's not necessarily, there's the difficulties, and it's a lot, basically. But what does this episode change? We know Davros. Maybe there's some line I've missed. Maybe he was canonically meant to have been a wheelchair user we see him introduce the Type 3 Dalek, or Type 3 travel machine, which is the same Type 3 travel machine that he introduces in Genesis of the Daleks, which has a name drop here, but there's no massive particular reason why these two things have to be at the same point of time, or instantly one to the other. There could be more of time for Davros to be injured in the war, and become the Davros we see. Maybe that's the whole point. I haven't read the objections. Maybe I'll go in now and look at them before we end the stream. I'm just very, very kind of lost as to what the controversy is. If anything, the bigger controversy should really have been how appropriate for a children needs special is a comedic sketch showing one of the biggest horrors of the Doctor Who universe, which is a blatant Nazi racial purity symbology, and making a joke out of that. I get, ignoring the fact it's a TV show and it's a Saturday children's show, or whatever, however you want to describe it. Symbolically, this is meant to be representing quite a dark part of humanity, and you choose that to be the comedic thing is a bit tasteless, and especially a fundraiser about vulnerable, including disabled children, making a joke out of something that's representing Nazi Germany. Surely that's a more controversial thing than anything canonically. I do like that the Doctor did say something about timelines of canon, and I'm like, you knew what you were doing when you were writing that line. Everyone laughed about that, and I sort of hate it when I hear a line that I can tell the writers have a chuckle about, because it's kind of meta, but whatever. Surely that's the more controversial thing. Yeah, the Genesis episode of Genesis of the Daleks. So this is presumably this is apparently an hour after we last saw the Doctor in Power of the Doctor. Somehow they accidentally crash land in Skaro earlier than they ever second earlier than they ever have, but I suppose they've also landed in Skaro accidentally before, so that's not a massive issue, truth be told. They avoid meeting Davros, which is good. I was worried that they're going to meet Davros, and that's probably the bigger kind of canon rewrite than anything else, or continuity, because when people say canon, they mean continuity. Canon is just, what's official and what isn't official, and even the BBC don't have a stance on that. It's pretty clear that TV is the only kind of top tier canon, and everything else is kind of sub tier canon. That's a completely different debate. Yeah. Basically, Doctor Land babbles. Apparently, he now names the Daleks. Gives them the catchphrase, which might very well be some of the controversy people are talking about, and also gives them the plunger. So, in a sense, he was kind of trying to fix the timeline, but also he kind of was the reason why they have the plunger, which is a weapon that gets turned into a weapon at some point. So that's kind of in his hands. That's a bit of a dark bit of humor. Let's look at some. I mean, it was fun. It wasn't the most hilarious children's thing. It was fun. It was alright. A bit amusing. Seems odd, but the Doctor would just this is what he decided to focus on at this point. They decided to focus on at this point rather than their face thing. But I mean, whatever, it's not a huge thing. Oh yeah, I was gonna say if you're gonna I'm past the point now, but it was a good point. Let's have a look at some of these controversies. Controversial Doctor Who. Which group do I go in to find? Literally trying to find these controversial posts, and then when you try to look for them, you can't see them. Okay, well, Doctor Who TV. Okay, so it was less what was in this episode and more that was in Doctor Who Unleashed, which I haven't actually watched yet. Maybe I should have watched that before I did this reaction. Where apparently he's going to say that Davros' classic look isn't going to return. Okay, I'm going to read it out here so I can read out and react to it with you guys. We had a long conversation about bringing Davros back because he's a fantastic character. Time and society and culture and taste have moved on, and there's a problem with old Davros. He is a wheelchair user who is evil. I had problems with that. A lot of us in the production team did too, associating disability with evil. Trust me, there's a very long tradition of this. I'm not blaming people in the past at all, but the world changes, and when the world changes, Doctor Who has to change as well. So I made a choice to bring back Davros without the facial scarring and without a wheelchair, or his support unit, which functions as a wheelchair. I say this is how we see Davros now. This is what he looks like. This is 2023. This is our lens. This is our eye. Things used to be black and white, but not anymore. Davros used to look like that, and now he looks like this. We're absolutely standing by that. I'm not a wheelchair user, so mistakes in this are very minimal. My voiceness is very minimal. I would prefer to just retire the character, to be honest. If there's that, I mean, there's nothing. I don't want to like argue against that take because they're not wrong, really. And maybe there's someone who is hurt by this association. The thing is, I know plenty of wheelchair users who cosplay as Davros, like. And I have to wonder, is anyone who's actually a wheelchair user would they include in this competition? I mean, I always say the perspective that if one person is hurt by something, then that thing is more than enough worth being left behind. Like, one person's feelings, one person's safety is more important than anyone else's enjoyment. If no one is hurt by you removing a thing and someone is made safe by removing it, you remove it. That's always been my stance, and I stick by that. I just generally don't know who is bothered by this. But I think, you know, like I said, nothing that Davis is saying here is wrong in terms of, you know, disability theory and representation of. I mean, it's the exact same thing that I discussed in my dissertation. There is nothing good about associating disability with evil. But being said, I don't. In the text, no one is like, Davros, you're evil because you're in a wheelchair. You know, that's not a symbol of his evilness. That, if anything, is just a sense of like combining him with the Daleks. It's like it's incidental. It's not something to read into. And this comes from Davis, who, like, when he reintroduced the Cybermen, I know he didn't write the episode, but I don't think he did anyway. But he was still part of the production team. Had Lumic as a wheelchair user. Although actually, admittedly, I do recall that was because the actor hurt his leg. So that again, incidental. And when he brought back Davros, but I mean, again, that's him changing things. I want to engage in discourse here, but Doctor Who discourse is a very unhealthy place at the moment. If it was like 10 years ago, I'd be more willing to, but I tend to like try to avoid Doctor Who discourse nowadays because it just doesn't make me very happy anymore. I think it's better to just retire the character. I mean, I think Davros is like not that significant a figure that he needs to be brought back. You know. I mean, inevitably he will. What other discourse is there? But I just... Because then the idea here is that you can't have disabled people in villainous roles. And that's equally problematic. You need to be able-blind with your character association. Now, admittedly, when you have a high majority of disabled people playing bad guys, that's an issue. But, you know, there have been some like villainous roles who are disabled and been praised because they're portraying a disabled person as a bad guy role in a way which doesn't villainize disability, but actually humanizes it, making it realistic. Can't remember it now. Oh, it is. I think I discussed it in my dissertation. Or I saw a news piece on it. There was a disabled actor playing the villain in the show, and he was playing a disabled character. And that was praised because that was like not making disability villainous. And I think Davros probably exists more on that spectrum than anywhere else. So what other discourse is there? And also, do I want to engage? From my discourse is going to be so many people who aren't the right voice, like, to talk about this. Like, if you're at the very least not someone well versed in what do you call it, disability theory and representation in the media, then you shouldn't be talking about this, to be honest. But like, do I really want to deep dive on Doctor Who? Oh. So someone who is a wheelchair user has written that the evil cripple is a problematic trope, correct? They mentioned about Roger Lloyd Pack's character in Age of Steel, Rise of Sam, which I mentioned, but again, that was he had to be in a wheelchair because the actor hurt his leg. But this character doesn't mind because of how established character Davros is. This person here really makes it. I don't know why I'm digging into this discourse. I said I wasn't going to dig into the discourse. I don't want to dig into the discourse. I just... What else is there? Wow, William Russell is 99, or was yesterday. Seriously, I spent ages avoiding the discourse. Yeah, avoiding the discourse, and then trying to look for the discourse, and now I can't find any of the discourse. Oh, this person's able, but he has a nuanced. Oh, they have a nuanced take. So it started by being like the reason why Davros is megalomaniac is because they're ashamed of their disability, and that's a slightly like icky take to take because how do you read into that? But then they go on by saying that if they were supported rather than being in a Nazi society, then they would have been more empowered and not self-hating. And actually, that's a fairly decent take because a big problem in the disability community is self-hate because of society's ableism. And maybe having that take with Davros is actually kind of good because that's something that we, as a disabled community, that's probably the toxic part of the disabled community. Is internalized ableism. There is more kind of internalized isms in this community. Well, okay, I'm saying this without any kind of like, is this true or not? It might not be true. That might be like a really bad take for you to make. As someone who's part of the disabled community, I think I deal with more kind of like internalized issues with disability than I do with race. I mean, that's pretty much the two things I'm part of, so I can't really go any further than that. But, you know, I mean, I don't know. I was gonna say I like to think that because of, in general, how the momentum of feminism is that there's probably hopefully less women who have internalized sexism. I mean, there are some, and I've talked to some, so I know they exist, but like the problem is that people with disabilities, a lot of people who don't identify, who are like afraid of identifying as being disabled. So it's not that so much that they're empowering themselves in their own way, and that might be counterintuitive to the movement. It's just that they're kind of like backing out of it, kind of deal. That was horribly explained. Well, it's basically just that, and everyone's extrapolating. But let's wait until it actually happens. I think is the take to take. And we'll see how it does. Personally, I feel like if they want to avoid Davros as a disabled person, retire a character, because I think. It's not just a case of like sticking to the continuity of the show. I think there's enough arguments here and for that you potentially could harm the community actually by removing Davros, because like I've said, like a person pointed out, there is a take to be made that this character represents internalized ableism in a way which is actually fairly decently portrayed, and if you remove that, you move the representation of that. I just spilled cordial everywhere. Move the representation of that by undoing it. So whereas if you retire a character that still prevails, interesting. I'm gonna watch Doctor Who Unleashed now and see what the context is. I imagine it probably doesn't go any further than the article quoted, but boy, is this a Discord that I'm gonna be happy to look into. Okay, well, see y'all when I next see you. I need to play more Spider-Man 2, but I also need to do admin work. Isn't my life great? Okay, goodbye.